What kind of politics do we need? Well, what I'd like to suggest is, of course, we need an international framework. We need a certain amount of regulation if we can get it, although I think innovation rather than regulation will be the driving force of transformation. I think it will. But I think we need a different kind of map of politics for the 21st century, which I call utopian realism. I know utopian realism sounds like a contradiction in terms, but to me it is the gearing mechanism of the new politics which will emerge, and the entrepreneurial activities and opportunities which will come in its train. We need a dash of utopianism. Utopianism has gone out of politics. We need to bring it back. You look at everyone will have seen the newspapers, we will have seen that 100-mile tailback of cars in China, stretching from Beijing to somewhere up near Tibet. You look at that 100-mile traffic jam, you can see that you've reached a kind of terminus of copycat industrial development there. The car was invented as a means of mobility and freedom. When you're stuck in a 100-mile traffic jam and people were there for 4 days, they had tents and they were reading papers and they were playing cards. I mean, this has become contradictory. China cannot follow the same path which we have followed in the West, at least beyond another 10, 15 years, without completely subverting the whole point of its own economic development. We in the West cannot follow the same path. We have to think beyond the world as we see it. We have to think beyond, that's the utopian element, but I feel it's really important to think in an imaginative way beyond the things we see around us. But it has to be realistic too, because climate change has this, as I said, irrevocable character. It has this irrevocable character. If we leave it too long, it's too late. The emissions will be in the air possibly for centuries if we allow them to accumulate there. Therefore, you need realistic pathways towards utopian aspirations. If I give an example of that, I was looking, outside there, lots of nice electric cars around. Well, I'm sort of in favor of electric cars, although I'm not a great lover of cars really in general. But electric cars themselves, they're interesting, but what we have to think about is beyond the car. We have to be thinking about what would it be like beyond the role of the car as we've known it during the period of the dominance of the oil industry with the expansion of the West. If you look at a book by John Urry, U-R-R-Y, called Beyond the Car, very interesting, imaginative projection of the future of what a transit system might look like beyond the car. Or you look especially at the MIT study, Reinventing the Automobile. I recommend that to everyone here if you want to see where job opportunities are actually going to come from. The MIT study talks of a kind of mobile internet. They say you're going to have, or you could have, very different type of vehicle, far more different from our existing ones are the ones out there. They probably won't have a drivetrain at all, for example. They will be linked electronically. They will be coordinated through smart card systems. They will be zero carbon and linked to zero carbon power sources. Is this utopian? Yes. Is it realistic? Yes, because they sketch pathways in which such a system could be achieved. If you look around the world at a local level, you already find many cities which are looking at their transport system anew, integrating private and public transport. In the future, the division between private and public transport will increasingly break down, using smart cards as a way both of organizing traffic but also getting people out of their cars, providing for all sorts of other opportunities within the urban milieu for mobility, which doesn't involve the traditional private car. It's that kind of mix of utopianism and realism which I would plead with you to see as the vehicle, both of sort of on-the-ground, nitty-gritty economic entrepreneurial activity, but also as the basis of really trying to come to terms with what it means to create a low-carbon civilization, the prime exigency of our time. Well, I leave you with a little story. I used to be, as was mentioned by Michael, the head of the London School of Economics, which is part of London University, and one of the founders of the London School of Economics, which was founded by Fabian socialists and still sustains that tradition, was George Bernard Shaw. You might have heard of George Bernard Shaw. He was a playwright at the turn of the century. Most people have heard of him through musical Pygmalion rather than from the actual play itself, but he was one of the most celebrated playwrights of the turn of the century. George Bernard Shaw and Winston Churchill had a kind of acerbic, conflictful relationship with one another. And George Bernard Shaw once sent to Winston Churchill a note which said, "Dear Winston, here is an invite to the first night of my new play. Please bring a friend, always assuming you have a friend." And Winston Churchill wrote back saying, "Dear Bernard, thank you for the tickets. I'm sorry that I can't come to the first night. Please send me tickets for the second night, always assuming there is a second night." And I interpret this story as a story of second chances. With global poverty, there is always second chances. You can always do something about it. With climate change, there are no second chances. That is why it is the most problematic, but the most far-reaching exigency, political, economic, social, and technological of our time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let's take a few questions, all right?
Sure.